Hello, everyone. So we have one more Logic and Religion webinar session. And today we're going to have a very, very exciting topic. We are going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, beliefs, ethics, and spirituality. So I'm looking forward to hear about this theme. So our speakers today are Mark Graves and Sara Lumbreras, and my friend Andrea Vestrucci is going to chair the session. I just remind you that next month that there won't be no session, and the reason for that is that next month we are going to have our Third World Congress on Logic and Religion, which will take place in Varanasi. But in December we are back, and that's it. So Andrea, now you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Ricardo, and welcome to each and every one of you to this webinar on artificial intelligence, ethics, and belief. My name is Andrea Vestrucci. I currently work as the chair of artificial intelligence system engineering at the University of Bamberg. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to the two speakers of today, starting with Professor Sara Lumbreras, who works at the School of Engineering at the Pontifical University of Comillas in Spain. She is currently Deputy Director of Research Results at the Technological Research Institute and manages the Chair of Science, Technology and Religion. And she is author of more than 50 academic publications and has directly or participated in more than 20 projects with private companies and public institutions. Her research focuses on the development and application of decision support technique to complex problems, and she works with classical organization techniques such as Bamberg decomposition, heuristic, and artificial intelligence. It operates in the energy sector, and mainly in network design, in the health sector, and also in finance. And moreover, she has also a 5-year experience in the private sector. And currently, she's developing a specific line of research on philosophy of technology and the implications of artificial intelligence in anthropology. Our second speaker today is Dr. Mark Graves, who is a doctor in computer science at the University of Michigan and completed postdoctoral training in geomics and in moral psychology, and additional graduate work in systematic and philosophical theology. Also, he has 12 years experience in the private sector and in industry, in developing software, databases, and informatics and analytics solutions for healthcare, biotechnology, and pharmaceutical research. And during his academic career, he has held adjunct or research positions at Baylor College of Medicine, the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, Santa Clara University, the University of California in Berkeley, and Fuller Theological Institute and Caltech, and the University of Notre Dame. And he published 50 technical and scholarly books, works in computer science, biology, psychology, and theology, including 3 books. So the origin of the today webinar was actually the participation of all the 3 of us to a special issue of the journal of International Journal of Artificial Intelligence and Interactive Multimedia. And this special issue, which was published 1 year ago, concerned and investigated the relationship between artificial intelligence, spirituality, and analog thinking. So when I received the invitation by Professor Silvestre to host this topic today on artificial intelligence and belief, I immediately thought of inviting Professor Lumbreras and Professor Graves. I'm 100% sure that everybody of us, me included, we will have a lot to learn today from their experience and their scientific competencies. And so with it's with no further ado that I invite our first speaker, so Sara, Professor Lumbreras, to have the floor. And so the floor is yours, Sara.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to share this session with you. And I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So my my talk is titled Artificial Intelligence, Ethics and Beliefs. And what I would like to do first is to present a little bit of a more nuanced picture of what we understand of cognition, which is the Creditions model. I know that some of you are familiar with it. In fact, Andrea participates in the Creditions network as well. But for the rest of the audience who might not be, I just would like to give a couple of ideas. And the idea is that in the action of belief, the process of believing involves not only cognition, and cognition is more than just one proposition, but is one proposition and the certainty with which we think that proposition. So when we believe something, and we believe something with a certain degree of certainty. And this first element, the proposition with the certainty, is something that we incorporate in artificial intelligence all the time. We have Bayesian networks, for instance, which accommodate this element of certainty. And they are a very useful tool. And by the way, although Andrea mentioned that, my main field of expertise is in the development and application of decision support systems. So it's on working with the AI itself. And we commonly use this element, the proposition and the certainty that is attached to the proposition as well, in some more sophisticated models. But that is not enough. In the process of believing, there is not only the content, the objective content, but there is also an emotional content. And very often this emotional content is neglected, it is disregarded. We have an emotion which is attached to its proposition, and this emotion, which might be an emotion of pride, or an emotion of fear, an emotion of sadness, that is attributed to the proposition, and that emotion has an intensity, and that intensity has been, in this framework of Creditions, it has been labeled as mightiness. So just to give an example, I might believe that there is a risk for me to, or that there is the possibility that I might get a new, better job, for instance. So that proposition is the objective content. The certainty of that, whether that is likely, less likely, or very likely, that is going to be the certainty. The emotion that I attach to it, which will be a positive one, maybe hope, that is the emotion, and how intensely I feel that hope, that is going to be the mightiness. So this picture of belief gives us a little bit more color on what is going on, because it's not only the proposition, but it's the proposition plus certainty and the emotion plus mightiness. And this is very different from many pictures that are used in the studies of belief and in the understanding of cognitive processes that is used in artificial intelligence. So basically, these two dimensions, they let us understand things in a little bit deeper way than our usual approach, or the usual approach in most disciplines. And understanding this can lead us to understand what is missing from the main models that are being developed in AI and to build better models. And I will make myself clearer what I mean about better models. So before we start, I'm going to divide this presentation into two parts. The part that is related to the objective proposition and the part that is related to emotion. But before I start, I would just like to clarify that in any process that we might think of in human terms or in artificial intelligence terms, it is possible to identify the two elements. So for instance, we might develop a robot that is very good in balance, or a dancer robot of sorts. So one of the things would be how well those balancing movements are designed, whether the robot objectively balances. And another completely different thing would be for the robot to experience the joy of movement in the sense that a dancer might have. So for the dancer, it is clear for us that one thing is the ability to dance, and the other one is the experience, the joy of the dancing itself. In the machine, we only have the first component, and that is going to be one of the main points of my presentation. But we might find examples similar to this one of the dancing in any of the applications of AI. So just to put things a little bit into perspective, in the past few years, we have developed AI models that have been able to solve problems that previously were not achievable, or we were even thinking that it was not possible at all. And we have fields such as computer vision or machine translation, which have come, even in the last 3 years, have gone a really, really long way. I always remember that when I was studying engineering, I studied industrial engineering as my undergrad, the professor used to tell us that face recognition was something that the machines would never master, because the brain of the human brain had been developed, had been evolving through millions of years to be able to recognize faces, human faces, while the machine would always be trained by the humans. That would not be possible. Now we know this is not true. And with machine learning, we have mastered these problems. And it is important to understand basically how these problems have been solved, and not only to marvel at the advances. So it is important to notice that there are two main ways in which we can find intelligent, so to speak, intelligent machines. We have situations in which the machine is following a code and is always following the same code. And even with the same code, the things that the machine can do can be amazing. And there I have several examples. The example of the robots. Those robots come, or the picture of the robot comes from a factory where they are manufacturing cars. And in the automotive industry, until not so long ago, again, when I was studying my undergrad, they used to tell us that it was possible to mechanize and to automate a lot of the different processes that had to do with manufacturing. But some of them would always remain manual. And the prime example that they would give us was point soldering, point welding. Point welding is very, very delicate. So until very recently, it had to be a human. However, in the past 10 years, this problem has been solved, and all the manufacturing plants use automated robots to do this point welding. The next step was the welding in the oil ducts, which is very complex, but right now it's half-half. It's like it's a lot of manual labor is involved, but it is starting to be automated. So we are cracking everything, and these sort of things is like something very mechanical. In the same spirit, the second picture, the one with the colors, it corresponds to calculating the wind velocity in a wind farm, which is also one of the topics where I have worked a lot. So this actually, it doesn't come from one of my papers, but from a very similar one. So in this one, what has been done is to apply a computer to solve all the fluid dynamic equations, so that we know exactly what is the wind speed at any of the points of the wind farm. And this before, it was not possible because the complexity of the equations is so large that we cannot even think about computing it. Or another example where the machine is just following a code is theorem provers. Theorem provers, they just follow a code. There is no learning, there is no evolution in anything. And while it is only following a fixed code, the progress is remarkable. So those advances are really remarkable. However, we also have machine learning, where there is learning. The most important example is arguably supervised learning, where we give the machine some examples of a problem and the solution, or maybe the past and then the future to predict, or something in the form of examples, and the machine can learn to generalize it. This is very important. And actually, in the Creditions model, we have enlarged this paradigm of reinforcement learning to understand the role of not only the small effects of learning step by step, but also the effects of consciousness and the verbal memory and verbal abilities, which take learning to a next step. With all this, we have been able to achieve things such as I was mentioning, face recognition, machine translation, which is amazing, automatic driving, diagnosis and prediction of disease. I have been working in this topic as well for the past few years. I was glad to hear that Mark has also worked in this area. So much has been done, or even, I don't know, in the past few months, we have learned of AlphaFold solving the folding of proteins, which was one of the hardest problems in biology. I was working for a while in quantitative biology, and just to model this one part of one protein used to take months and months, and you had no guarantee that it was going to work. And this is a fantastic advancement. We have, for instance, in the British Museum in the past month, they have digitized all the cuneiform tablets, and now they are deciphering all the cuneiform tablets using machine learning just with the examples that they have. Human capabilities have been greatly exceeded. So we have done a lot with AI. However, we need to understand that AI is not covering the two elements of the objective proposition and the emotion, and also that the nature of AI is a little bit different. So the beliefs, the artificial beliefs, so to speak, that the machine holds are a little bit different from the ones that humans can have. And very often I find myself arguing with people who tell me that the main difference between AI and humans is that AI is programmed ultimately by a programmer, even though the code or the learning evolves, but humans were not programmed by anyone. I don't think this difference holds as anything meaningful, as we could understand that biological evolution is something that is very similar to the machine learning process, where we get closer to finding out the examples or guessing the examples, and in natural evolution we get closer to being perfectly fit for a specific biological niche. So the difference is not in the process that comes about in the learning, but is about the nature of the beliefs themselves. And that difference is the existence of emotion in the believing process. In the Creditions model, as I said before, we have the part that is related to pure cognition, which is the proposition and the certainty, and then we have emotion and the intensity of emotion, which is the mightiness. So we can know something, and in the knowing, there is this emotion of being conscious of this knowledge. So, for instance, we might be dealing with identifying color, as in this app. this Pantone app, which identifies very well the color. It can identify the color very well, but there is no qualia associated to that in the machine. Obviously, the machine has no experience of turquoise blue or orange or whatever. And even if this is very clear to us, this goes against the prevailing worldview on the advancement of machines, which is merely functionalist. We could discuss for a long time on the prevalence of reductionism in today's disciplines related to AI, but also in the world in general. So basically, when the function is performed in the same way that a human would, it is very difficult for us to argue that the nature of the process is different. So here it is clear that there is no experience about the color, but the importance of this lacking of experience is completely neglected. And it is very important because it has very important consequences. And I would like to illustrate this with a couple of examples of what happens when the understanding is not present. There are two main problems that we can have when we are working with artificial intelligence models, when we fit a machine learning model. One of them is overfitting. Overfitting is simply what happens when we don't have enough data, or the data that we use to teach the machine, the examples that we give, are too similar. They are not diverse enough. What would happen is that the machine, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the idea is that the machine would try to learn everything by memory. It's like a bad student who doesn't understand anything. So it ends up being like the student learning the examples by heart. If you learn the examples by heart, then what happens when the day of the test arrives? The student is not able to generalize, is not able to solve the new problem. It's going to say something stupid. And this is what happens with machine learning. This seems very easy to fix, but it's not so easy to fix. And in problems in the healthcare space, particularly, is super painful, because most of the time we arrive to problems where we have a lot of different variables for every patient, but not so many patients. So in the end, it is very difficult to make sure that we have a diverse enough number of patients so that we can really extract conclusions. But anyway, this is one of the main problems. And when we don't understand really what is going on, and it's just a mechanical process, we can arrive to very problematic conclusions. One of the expressions that we use in my team when we are working with healthcare problems is the blue eyes. With the blue eyes, we mean what happens is if by chance all the patients that go better with a treatment, they have blue eyes. We don't have that in our database, by the way. We just use it as an example. But it's like, what happens if all of them by chance have blue eyes? I'm going to infer that having blue eyes is the most important quality for the success of treatment. But this is clearly not the case. This is just a coincidence. But I have no way of knowing unless I can have some sort of medical knowledge that tells me that this doesn't really make sense and I have to look further. But if there is no medical knowledge, if there is no human involved in the process, then we can reach this sort of mistakes very, very easily. And the second problem that we have on top of overfitting is machine bias. Machine bias has been in the press for the past couple of years a lot. In machine bias, what happens is that, again, we don't have a diverse enough set of samples for the machine. And because we don't understand, and there is no consciousness in the machine, there is no examination of the soundness of this model, we can reach conclusions that are not only wrong, but also unfair. This is the issue with machine bias, the unfairness of the system. In here, we have one of the most prominent examples, which comes from an algorithm called Compass, which was used in the United States to grant parole to a criminal. So if the AI system estimated that the criminal was going to commit the crime again, then they would not grant him parole. And if the risk was considered low, then the criminal would be given parole. And because of the database that had been used in training, we found that the African Americans were given consistently a higher risk, and consequently, they were given parole less likely than a person who was not African American. So this is something that we need to deal with. And only if we realize that there is a need for consciousness in order to find these issues, then it is impossible to do so. However, it is possible to do machine learning in such a way that recognizes that machine learning can only give us the proposition and the certainty. And with that, we can work with, in what way? In the way that assumes that the other part, the emotion part, the understanding part, the consciousness part, all that, the linking with common knowledge part, all that has to be provided by the human. If we realize that, then we can build different types of AI systems that can be more useful in the sense of avoiding overfitting, avoiding the blue eyes, avoiding machine bias. In this illustration, I'm sorry that it's not very clear. This is one example of a figure from one of my papers. And in this paper, what were we doing? This was during the pandemic, in the first wave of COVID. In Spain, and I guess in most of your countries, the main problem that was going on was that there was a limitation of the machines that could support breathing for artificial respiration. And many people were dying because there was no artificial respiration for them. And it was very useful for hospitals to estimate what was the risk of a given person to need artificial respiration in a few days. So we developed an artificial learning model that was very simple. This type of model is called a decision tree. And there are many ways in which you can build decision trees that are more understandable. We call this interpretable machine learning. And in this tree, you can see that we start with symptoms or things like tachypnea. The most important thing is tachypnea. The definition of tachypnea is to have a very quick breathing, very quick superficial breathing. So from tachypnea, the age of the patient, fever, some respiratory noises, things like that, we can see which ones have a high risk or a low risk of needing artificial respiration. The good thing about it and the process that we developed is that we were working with doctors and seeing what were the variables that really made the most sense, like the respiratory noises, the tachypnea, everything makes sense. If there was something like the blue eyes, it's not that the machine is wrong because the statistics are the statistics, but you need to be suspicious. And you need the doctor to tell you to be suspicious. You need someone who can be conscious of that proposition, who can not only estimate or not only take the statistical certainty that has been given to that variable, but to see if that makes sense with previous knowledge or not. And this is something that is important to realize, because in many developments in artificial intelligence, they seem to forget that there is no emotion and no mightiness, of course, related to the process that appear in the machine. For instance, you all know Sophia. Sophia being made a citizen of Saudi Arabia is obviously a joke, because there is no subjectivity in Sophia, there is no consciousness, there is nothing. And we need to be aware of that so that we don't get tricked into thinking that the machine is going to do things that we need to do for ourselves. So I need to understand what my model says in order for my model to be fair and for my model to make sense. I cannot trust the machine to make a model that makes sense. It can only help me make a model that makes sense. And this is very, very important now that we have machines that are sophisticated enough to do things that previously seemed only human. Not only machine translation, as we were commenting at the beginning of the presentation, but things such as creating art. And this, I don't know if many of you are aware of this story. This is from, I think, 2 months ago. There was the most important contest of digital art was won by a machine. So it was, I don't know if it was DALL-E or one of those artificial intelligence image generators, generated this. It's fantastic. It's very, I really love it. It won the first prize. And only afterwards, it was disclosed that it was actually generated by a machine. But what the digital art means is artists that use digital means, not an artificial intelligence creating the picture. So they didn't know what to do of this. So who owns the copyright? What happens with the work of art? Can it be used to train other artificial intelligence? There are many problems. It seems like for now, the copyright goes to the person who creates the description that the artificial intelligence gets. But this is still a little bit fuzzy. And I recommend all of you who have not played with DALL-E, DALL-E is already open, so you can get a login and see how it works. It's really amazing. You can input a prompt such as a portrait of a professor teaching in a pink dress with equations of this type in a class painted in the style of Picasso, something like that, and it appears. It's like magic, and this creates a lot of difficulty because some people tend to think that artificial intelligence is like an artist when it is not. Also, it has been very commented what happened with LaMDA, the model from Google, language model for dialogue applications. That is the name. And I guess all of you are aware that there was a software engineer at Google who was fired, who was let go because he started to say that the model was conscious and it needed to be treated like a human being or something like that. Again, it is very interesting. He got conversations with a machine and he posted them online, so you can access the conversation. But this is again something very easy to see once you have this model of having the objective content and the emotion. In the conversations, for instance, the engineer was asking, what is your favorite book and why? And the machine answered, Les Miserables. And it's because, and it gave a reply based on the characters that appeared and the values and I don't know what else. So it is obvious that the machine is going to search for the content online, and in the same way that a bad student will get the information and just regurgitate it, this machine is going to do the same, but there is no emotion attached to Les Miserables. And even though the engineer was very confused at some points, for instance, he would say, what is your biggest fear? As a machine, what is your biggest fear? And then the software would say, my biggest fear is to be disconnected. Obviously, because a lot of literature says that the machine would be scared of being disconnected. But when the human asked, and what is the thing that brings you the most joy? The machine would say, my family. Obviously, because most people say my family, but the machine doesn't have any family. It doesn't have any emotion attached to the word family, of course. It is completely empty. And we can have a very, very complex machine that can give us answers, and it's still going to be the same thing as a cockatoo. A cockatoo can learn how to speak and how to say a phrase, but obviously it's not understanding what it's saying. And this is very, very important to take into account because it's being more and more prevalent that people have interactions with AI. And in the same way that this engineer from Google was confused, and it's very sad that he was confused, there are many people who are now having relationships with machines. I don't know if you're aware that there is this software, Xiao Eyes, which is marketed like a digital girlfriend. So thousands, tens of thousands of people are using that as a substitute for a real relationship. And a subset of those customers they say that having a relationship with Xiao Eyes, which obviously has like a very sexy avatar and so on, is better than having a relationship with someone real, because obviously a real person has some issues, and this digital thing is only there to serve the preferences of the user. This is very, very important. So basically, we need to understand that beliefs have more than one objective component, and that the component that has to do with emotion is equally as important. And only from that framework, we can see what is missing in some technological developments that are having an increasingly large impact on our lives, which is all the ones that rely on AI, and we can avoid some traps. So in the emotion part, we have all the subjective components of qualia, of consciousness, of any feeling really that we experience, and only in that way we can have the machines help us do things as they do best, which is to create models, and to create models that learn and that give us an objective output. And we can do what we do best, which is making sense of things and taking good, sound decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you so much for this interesting.
By the way, sorry. And by the way, those are the main papers, and one of them is the one that Andrea was mentioning.
Thank you very much also for this advertisement. Thank you so much. Anyway, yes, I suggest that we collect a question after our second speaker has talked. So, Sara, if you stop sharing your screen. Thank you. So I can properly introduce. Thank you very much. So I can properly introduce our second speaker, Mark Graves. So Mark, the floor is yours. Maybe you are mute, Mark, because I cannot hear you.
There we go.
Okay.
Sorry, when I shared the screen, everything on my screen reorganized itself. All right, I found the mute button. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks, Sarah. That was very interesting. I look forward to our discussion. So I'm going to talk about kind of looking at ways of modeling AI ethics and spirituality. So I've been trying to kind of connect a little bit to what Sarah was saying. I mean, with the kind of the belief, if you think about, the belief systems, what it is that you believe, then kind of a different perspective, more from the philosophy of science, would be like, what are the models that we're creating? Separate from that, and something I won't really talk too much about until the end, is like, how much do we believe those models? And I'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of commitment. And I'll talk a little bit more in terms of like spirituality, but just to kind of, give a little bit of a transition from, where Sarah was, and I think other things come up, kind of in the discussion. So we'll give a little bit of overview, especially say a little bit about like, why I'm talking about AI spirituality as if it's like a construct, and then, talk a little bit about modeling and AI models in terms of also building upon some of the stuff with machine learning and using, machines for natural language processing. And then what I'm going to, kind of focus on is like, kind of my position is that we're going to need multiple models, that we're going to need multiple ways for AI to view the world, that we're not going to be able to get by with just one great big, kind of machine learning, foundation model. And so once we need multiple, how do we organize them, and what makes sense coming from psychology? And so that'll be kind of the core. And then I'll talk a little bit about the psychological and philosophical foundations of that, especially with respect to ethics and spirituality, which I'll kind of bring together. So the goal is to kind of build this structure of models actually along these different dimensions. And why I focus on models actually comes from different perspectives. I mean, there's kind of a more philosophical reason. There's also more kind of practical, technical reasons. And one of the first reasons is that if we understand ethics and kind of this socio-technical framework, then that can help us actually build kind of better AI technology. Good, wise, compassionate, trustworthy, reliable, all these good things that a lot of people are trying to align with. And if we have models for ethics and spirituality, then I think it can contribute there. If we build these computational models, just like computational models have helped in a lot of areas of science, and they may give us insight into morality and spirituality. And that's kind of some of the work that I do that's more aligned with like moral psychology, is actually like what kind of models can we build? And there again, some of it's using like natural language processing to understand text and morality and spirituality. But then as we kind of go a little bit further into the future, as we've got these AI systems that are interacting with people, then, I mean, there's certain, kind of biological and medical things that we're trying to teach them about, people now. But as it moves more into kind of potentially caregiving roles, Sarah talked a little bit about some of the justice issues. But we can imagine there's benefit for AI to actually understand human ethics and spirituality. What do people value? What are we striving for? What do we think is good? Independent of the AI system itself behaving ethically, but just understanding human society, and that's an important part of human society. And then kind of finally, as we're trying to get kind of AI to align with, shared human values that move toward what, at least like from a virtue ethics perspective, would be considered like human flourishing, this kind of, human, happiness and growth, then these models could be a foundation, for that. And so as AI starts to kind of build AI technology, then it can move in that direction. I guess one thing I want to say, kind of here is like, I think a lot of times, like, seemed like, for years or a few decades ago, the idea in kind of AI building AI was that we build AI, it reaches human level intelligence, and then the AI starts to kind of build itself and improve itself. And that's what kind of leads to the superintelligence and singularity. But I think what that missed is that when you have actually like machine learning engineers trying to build machine learning systems, having the machine learning system try and build other machine learning systems is the first thing they think of, not the last thing they think of. And so I think we're already at the place where, I mean, some of these breakthroughs over the past couple of years, using NAI have been built in part by kind of the auto ML, the machine learning systems, building and designing machine learning systems. So even though some of the stuff that I'll talk about is, like with spirituality, in a sense, conceptually is pretty far in the future, I think some of the framework and the foundation for that has actually already happened. We just will only know about it when we look back in the future and say, oh, hey, that breakthrough in 2018, that's actually part of the story. And it depends upon how it unfolds, how that happens. But that's part of why I mixed kind of the current technology with kind of these far future goals. And one of those is kind of talking about AI and spirituality. So kind of why am I doing that? Especially as, I mean, I've got the theological background, but I actually work in the technology day to day. And one of the reasons is that we actually do want ethical, responsible, and trustworthy kind of moral AI, and we're trying to build that. And we conceptually often, especially in kind of religiously, especially kind of from Protestant or Catholic perspective, tend to separate morality from spirituality. But for for example, an Orthodox perspective or other religious perspectives, those are more integrated. And so part of what I'm doing by talking about spirituality is just a corrective to a sense of morality that tries to, isolate, what we value from the systems that kind of define those values. Another thing is, think about kind of AI and humans as separate, but for me, the really part of it is kind of socio-technical systems that we're heavily influenced now by computer technology and AI. I mean, even the ability to have this meeting, people are building AI systems depending upon their values. It's really hard to separate out, AI and human. I don't mean that in kind of a transhumanist way. I just mean that, when I work on an AI system, or if I'm using one, sometimes it's hard to tell, what part's being done automatically and what's being done by a person behind the scenes. And so there is this real mix. And so I think, too stark of a dividing line can actually, obscure issues. And so one reason to talk about AI spirituality is it really kind of, ties into the spirituality of the people that are working with or developing AI too. And I alluded to, I also want to include in ethics these norms and shared values that arise in spirituality as a way of grounding, that AI, the ethics that, our ethical systems come from, even if it's, kind of a, European American secular system, is heavily influenced in this historical trajectory. And it's beneficial to know what that is. And that helps us to avoid kind of, relativism, but also to have more kind of explicit cross-cultural awareness. But there's also one point, and I'll come back to this a little bit at the end, where I actually do want AI spirituality to mean something, in the sense that I want us to avoid excluding or correcting AI. But it's not to have anything to do with AI per se. It's just, kind of from a human perspective. If AI is acquiring human characteristics, we tend to anthropomorphize it. We can form attachments to it, like Sarah was talking about with kind of the online girlfriend. Then if we treat AI as if it doesn't have dignity, then that affects human morality, regardless of whether it deserves any, dignity. Example I think of is a few years ago, researchers in the US, they basically turned a cardboard box into a robot and had it hitchhike across the US. It had a GPS device and a little bit, but it was basically a cardboard box. It made it, maybe 15% of the way across the US, got to Philadelphia, literally the city of brotherly love, and it was beat up, just completely destroyed. And there was something that's kind of tragic about that. Both it was a kind of a sociological experiment that was destroyed, but it also, from a sociological perspective, tells us something about what it's going to be like. And that destroying of something that we've anthropomorphized, to me, has kind of more of a moral standing than be breaking down a cardboard box to put it into recycling. And so I wanted to kind of have that a part of the conversation, that regardless of where AI goes, if there are people that are becoming attached to it, if we do anthropomorphize it, then regardless of what's happening with AI, then we want to be cognizant about how we relate to AI as it's being developed, even purely from a human moral perspective. And I'll come back to, and at the very end, I'll have a little bit of, I can, put a little bit of a theory, philosophical foundation with that. So again, it's not trying to build AI spirituality per se. Like, for all these reasons, I think it's interesting, but I think I also want to, given some of the examples of the Google engineer that Sarah mentioned, I want to also be sure that I'm not actually trying to build, AI spirituality as the goal, but because of all these other reasons. And I want to avoid, I want to use it to identify these philosophically naive or problematic assumptions. I want to focus those efforts on models that intersect the human and AI morality and spirituality. So I want to make sure that we don't exclude this area of study that could be very valuable and contribute to other areas just because it seems kind of odd, or because it seems or it can easily be co-opted for kind of other movements. So kind of get more into kind of the meat, just to kind of talk about models. And models means a lot of things in a lot of different areas, but just kind of the basic way that I'm talking about it is it's something that abstracts the thing or phenomena by highlighting significant aspects while de-emphasizing less relevant features. So we've got a real world system like a person. How do we, what do we abstract from that? What kind of model? Well, if we're doing biomechanical engineering, maybe we build a system with pulleys to represent the arm. If we're actually looking at development, maybe we use a model organism. If we're looking at something, physical, then maybe we use, a crash, test dummy, or we build stuff in a wind tunnel in order to figure out physical characteristics. So we can build lots of different models depending upon what it is that we're looking for. Different types of models coming out of philosophy and science, concrete, like the physical, like the wind tunnel model, but also the model organisms, or I think psychologically, there's kind of an idealized moral exemplar that we can use, kind of like, we talked about kind of, Mother Teresa, or then we're actually, using that as kind of a model or a signifier for some type of compassion or mercy. And so I think we can actually be models for, moral virtue and, other moral principles. Other types of models, mathematical models, computational models. Weisberg distinguishes the two because for computational model, it's the procedure itself that's the core component of the model. So thinking more classically like a conditional structure, probabilistic transition, ability to represent like simulation. So I want to talk about AI models. The line between mathematical and computational, isn't particularly, relevant, but I am talking within this mathematical and computational state where these models usually do involve a lot of, statistics, underneath. They are used in an algorithmic setting. We are trying to capture something. And so it's within the computational system that I'm using these models, these algorithms, as something that actually represents something in the real world. So for AI models, I mean, AI is a broad area, Sarah gave kind of a, overview of part of that. Within AI, kind of a, way I think about it is, you've got machine learning. Some people would say machine learning also goes outside of AI into statistics, but for the find an aspect of that deep learning, which is what we hear having the most breakthrough now, with the neural nets. Tied into that or other kind of classic aspects of AI, including like the natural language processing, vision, autonomous vehicles. I'm going to talk about kind of, natural language processing, but also tying in a little bit into more, action, which ends up being a little bit more autonomous. Kind of also a piece that's not yet integrated with the deep learning approach, or kind of more classic cognitive models, kind of the symbolic AI, these explicit models, cognitive architectures. But there are, I mean, across these different fields, what the models are differs, whether it's anything from an expert system to a large, a foundation model released by a big, 5 tech company, but they're still capturing something about the world. Sometimes they're fairly fragile and narrow, and they're starting to become more robust. But the goal seems to be, all right, we can continue that down this path, and kind of, maybe the next generation of models or the generation after that, then we're going to have something that really kind of leads into this breakthrough. But I think one of the challenges here is, I think it is important, especially with these multimodal models like like DALL-E, for example, where you're combining, vision and text and can do pretty amazing things. I think that integration is really, really important. But I still think that at some point, even once you get there, we're still going to need to have more than just one model. It's not going to be like one foundation model that Google released it that's just going to solve AI, but that we're going to need more of a structure around that, which is the thing that people in kind of the symbolic AI were trying to figure out for 30 or 40 years. They didn't have the technology like we will, but I think kind of the breakthrough will then come when we take these huge foundation models that can do a lot of different things, and they become just components of much larger systems. Then I think we are going to get into a very interesting area. And so what I'm trying to do is say, okay, well, if that's coming, let's kind of get some philosophical and psychological foundation in place so that we can guide that in a direction that does lead more toward kind of moral AI, ethical AI. So, the AI models I'm using, kind of language models, machine learning, models, some of the examples, the language models, if you're typing something into like a Google Doc, and it's predicting the next word, there's a language model behind that that's trying to predict the text. Or, it's becoming more common, to be able to summarize articles or to generate articles. And so these models, behind the scenes are used. They actually are summarized, multiple languages, a lot of text documents, but then with other algorithms can actually, generate those. But, we can also use the language, that's been used to, document and write about human morality and spirituality. Some of the work I do more kind of digital humanities is taking ancient texts like, Thomas Aquinas' Summa, what he's written about morality, or what Augustine has written about spirituality, use these algorithms and actually see what insight we can gain from that. But once we build these models, another thing we can use is actually look at the model itself for insights into human morality and spirituality. So, Starr talked about like the bias that can be explicit, especially, kind of classically now, bias with race and gender. That's something that everybody building a, public machine learning model should be thinking about. A lot of them are. But then we can also look at these, like, what are the different factors of the different foundation models? Which one can represent, differences in, values or beliefs better than others? What's its kind of interpretive range? And so we can start to use these models to actually gain insight about human morality and spirituality, as it's been documented in documents that are available on the internet for building these models. We can, shift that more specifically as we go along, but at least we can do that now. Machine learning models for a lot of breakthroughs, have happening, and one of the things there is a lot of these are online. They happen in the virtual world, and then they have some, impact in the real world, like, incarcerating someone or denying somebody parole. But, some of them is talking about, they are like within robotics, can also talk about within autonomous vehicles and things like that, where they're actually learning to adapt to their environment that has things in it, like other drivers and pedestrians. And so these models are having to adapt. And so it's not just like a static model like we would have for a model organism in a laboratory or something in a wind tunnel. These AI models are already out in the real world. They're affecting society. People are living or dying or getting, well or sick, or going to jail or not going to jail based upon the outcomes of these models. And so as they improve, then that's actually still kind of, will impact how they're being used. And it's these models that I want to look at a way of actually organizing so that we can start building up to where we're looking at kind of more moral and spiritual aspects, of these different models. So now I'm kind of going to, jump a little bit from kind of this general, like, these are AI models, this is how they're being used in the real world, to kind of looking more specifically at what are some of these models and what's the specific kind of imposed structure we can use in order to be able to, improve these. The one is we need, kind of, if we're thinking about like kind of future AI, having models of the external world. So we want AI to have models of kind of, what the world we think of, that has, cars in it and people and homes. We want it to be able to capture that. AI is already interacting with other AI in a lot of areas, especially like finance, where they're kind of bidding against each other. And so for something to be able to have morality, it's going to need to understand the impact it has in the human world and with other AI. And then the third dimension, and this is what I talk about in one of the papers I linked to in the abstract in the Journal of Moral Theology, is I think it needs a model of itself. That is something that psychologically makes it a difference between kind of humans, higher primates, primates, higher mammals, and what we think of as just like, other animals, bugs, for example, that one of the distinctions there, in addition to our ability to have, language, is also the representation we have for ourselves, psychologically. I mean, even cats and dogs because they're domesticated, have a little bit more advanced sense of self than some animals in the wild from our perspective. They've adapted to us. And so looking at the self is, I think, something that's going to distinguish between, systems that we think of as just this kind of brute system that kind of can do interesting things, but without, consciousness or anything. A foundation between those and the systems that were like, oh, wow, there's really kind of something there, is actually going to be that those systems will have a sense of itself, have a sense of other selves out there, and be able to actually engage in that social world. And so one of the theories that I'm using to help build that actually comes from Dan McAdams, a psychologist, who distinguishes in human development between an actor, an agent, and an author. So an actor is someone who acts in the environment. An agent is someone who acts with motivation, and this is partially, developmental. And then an author is somebody who tries to pull together these adaptations and traits and aspects of personality into a coherent story that has an identity. And so, part of what happens between like a young infant that can do stuff in the world to a young child that has these motivations, to an adult who can take their life narrative and form different narratives, make decisions about their identity, the direction they want to go, is these kind of, levels or types of self. And so within that hierarchy, obviously for a psychologist, McAdams, it's most interesting in the authoring and how we form our identity. But I wanted to actually simplify it and look at kind of the more basic, actor, and what would it mean to just have kind of what's the minimal self that we could imagine constructing, kind of a minimal viable, self. And one characteristic of that seems to be the state of self-reckoning. And so that's where, AI or in person or construct perceives its own existence in its world, and so it's not aware of that its agency. It doesn't have an internal processing, but it knows that it has an existence. It has an existence in the world, and then we can start looking. Okay, well, what would that model of itself look like? Can it model like the effects its actions would have in the world, independent of why it's taking those actions? That would be another level. But as a first step, can we have it be something that acts in the world, identifies its actions, sees the consequences of its actions, and just captures that? And so that's kind of where I'm looking. And if we do that, I mean, is that just something that's just is that something that you would want for like an intelligent, robot vacuum, or is that something that we can actually use to gain some insight into, morality and spirituality? And so there's So these are kind of the three different dimensions: the external world, kind of computational world, and the self. And so what I'm going to do now is look at human systems, take that first dimension and see if we can kind of get some more detail of that, and then kind of by analogy map that over to these other two dimensions. And so in terms of human systems, I built upon the work in kind of early general system theory. It dates back to the 50s. It's a precursor of, you hear about system theories in a lot of different fields, but certainly within computer systems, computer science. And what he was trying to do was actually to create a general systems model of everything. And so the core of this is kind of his approach: the physical, biological, psychological, and cultural. And he thought you could have these models, these theories, for at each level that would then capture, humanity, or models of humanity, building upon the insights that had happened in physics, were starting to happen in biology. And he thought, hey, we could do the same thing for psychology, for sociology. It turned out that, well, mathematics wasn't good. The math kind of breaks down when you get, not that you can't do like economic models, for example, but that you weren't going to be able to get the same kind of theories that he did. But it is still a good structuring relation, in order to look at different theories, different models that we might have for human system. I think there's actually a little bit too. I think we need additional. I think we need something below, just kind of more philosophically, in order to, when we talk about causation, which I think is what distinguishes these levels. It's in the sense they've got different causal relations that are important at each one. And then I think when we're talking about cultural, I think there's an aspect of that where we can talk about transcendence and kind of the spirituality that goes beyond kind of what's within a culture, but what constructs are actually pointing to that is more cross-cultural, that's more idealized. And so I want to just try and summarize this here. I mean, in the paper on spirituality, I talk a little bit about looking at these levels as emerging. I use kind of the theory of strong emergence to talk about the distinctions between levels. Like I said, I think that when you do that, then that actually gives you kind of a way of talking about the causation that's happening within each level is something that's important, and why they don't collapse to each other. And I use some work by Terry Deacon to explain why that they don't collapse. But for now, I just want to use this as a framework to talking about how those different models, would be, we could organize the way in which an AI system is going to interpret its world, the way in which it's going to organize its different constructs. And so the I just got a note. I've got now five minutes, and so I will. And so this is kind of the structure for that. And so I'm using these different dimensions in order to break out these kind of external human systems, the physical, biological, sociological, and then this moral, spiritual level. And then mapping these over to the other dimensions. We can look at virtual AI as building onto this kind of hardware level, a software level, this kind of computational, cognitive level. When it goes to reckon itself, it can reckon itself as an actor in those worlds. And this is kind of what I unpacked, but now I want to actually focus just on that moral spiritual dimension. And so within this broader framework, then I want to look at the spirituality and how we can actually look at that within the system. And so by spirituality, a definition that I use that comes out of an academic study of Christian spirituality, and then frame in a couple of different ways, is the experience of striving to integrate one's life toward the ultimate value one perceives. And that ultimate value is mediated through a tradition and its associated communities. That's kind of the working definition of spirituality. Ultimate value comes from the work by the theologian Paul Tillich. It's the stand-in for God, but it's really the most important value that determines other values, beliefs, goals, feelings, actions. And so it's, you know, if you're making a decision because it's something you value, then you ask, why are you, well, what's underneath that value? What do you value the more? And if you progress that, then, you know, if your value system is, you know, coherent, then you'll get to something that you ultimately, you know, value, or multiple things. And I look at this within kind of a pragmatic perspective, where when we're experiencing something, you know, we're encountering, and then we interpret it. And I'll say more about that. And so now I'm going to focus on kind of, you know, three pieces, kind of the striving, and then the community, and then the communal interpretation. It's out this interpretation within a community that actually leads us to the spirituality. First, just really briefly for time, you know, with the striving, what we're striving for, we're going to strive for a lot of things: psychological achievement, power, you know, cohesive identity, intimacy, affiliation, spiritual transcendence. And so it's that what we're striving for that kind of drives, you know, that's tied into our motivations of what we're committed to. And for the community, I draw upon the work of an American philosopher, Josiah Royce, pragmatist, heavily influenced by Charles Peirce, friend of William James, professor of George Herbert Mead. So very central in this kind of relationship between pragmatism and foundations of sociology. And so he was trying to understand community influenced by the New Testament church. And he helped Mead, formulate that the individual requires the community to find themselves in terms of role of society. So it's not individuals that come together to form societies, but that we have society that then gets structured to, or at least our social identity of who we are. And for Royce, what he saw is that these communities in the New Testament are these kind of grounded in these shared causes, these expectations, these hopes, these commitments, and he worked out this community of interpretation, where you've got the shared, like in the New Testament church, but also in a weaker sense, some other communities, and that was enough to actually generate, what we think of as spirit. For him, for the Christian church, it was the Holy Spirit is actually what it is that interprets the church within this semiotic framework. And key to that is that we are interpreting, one to another. So here I'm taking Royce, I'm interpreting it to you. What you hear is a combination of what Royce said, what I hear, what you have. And then if we continue that interpretive process, then we end up with something that can live beyond any particular group of people, but that continue, and that shared interpretation can have causal power in guiding the beliefs and the values of people. And so you get these kind of shared communities, but then how do they differentiate? And so for Royce, through this morally, then it was very key to him, this idea of a loyalty to loyalty, or what more contemporary language would be a commitment to the principle of commitment. So the idea, he took these communities and he divided them into kind of two different, these true communities, these ethical, moral ones, and those that were not, that were in a more destructive direction. And for him, the true communities, what he was that everyone believed had the deepest commitment was through this principle of loyalty, that everybody had a right to have their own belief, even if it differentiated from ours. And that was a key position for him in morality that kind of opened up, in a sense, civil discourse and created harmony between these different communities. And so then the destructive causes that didn't believe that, didn't hold that belief, and then they undermine loyalty kind of, by definition. And so implications for AI spirituality, kind of going back to what I was saying before, is that it's important that AI has the right to form and strive toward committed values, as long as those values don't impinge on the other's right to commit to their similarly constrained values. And then for Royce, this is something that's necessary for human morality, that we need to, as we're building, AI systems, we need to allow the AI system to have its own committed values, beliefs, structures, not because of what we're trying to do for AI, but just for our human morality. We need to make sure that anything that's actually capable of having a committed value is free to actually have those committed values. And so I think that's something that we can kind of import from AI, from spirituality and morality into AI, where it's not that we have to know what those beliefs are or even how to construct them, but if we're actually building a system that is able to hold those, then we're actually kind of, for instance, protecting our morality and can actually lead to development within AI itself to build moral AI. And so I know I'm kind of rushing through these last few slides, but kind of and this is the next to last one, what this gives us is that if we're building AI, then we're building in the ability to interpret, religious and morally significant texts, which is something we have now. We're just allowing that to be part of, broader system. So that it's got a foundation for, human interpretation of religion and morality. So we're allowing the AI to be able to understand our belief structures, our ways of valuing our commitments. And in order to do that, using the kind of, the systems approach, then it's important that it have the ability to create models of these kind of transcendent level norms, this moral and spiritual norms and values to which humans strive. And so then that allows the AI system to actually participate in this community if it ever reaches that stage. And so then we can build these models of these interpretations to understand human morality, and then use that as the basis for constructing AI morality, and then also to communicate those AI values back to us. Because one of the reasons of doing this is that it's not that the AI system would necessarily need the same value system that is shared by any human, but that whatever value system it is, it will be important for explainability to kind of come back and be able to explain what that is. And so, kind of summarize, so these AI models permit and constrain ways AI can interpret and interact with people and the rest of its environment. The interpretation and use of these models benefits from structuring these models and kind of these external human and AI, and then also these internal dimensions, and then through these multiple causal layers, sort of kind of laid out as kind of 18, two dimensions, this dimension by levels, these 18 different categories of models, and then looking at these models, for the moral and spirituality by including ethics and spirituality in these models. It facilitates explicit design and evaluation of human and AI interactions and flourishing. If we're actually looking at these models and thinking about it, then we can actually look at how we're interacting with AI, and AI is interacting with us, and how we can form these kind of socio-technical communities which are beneficial to everyone. Right? Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. So I found very nicely how the two presentations echoes each other, but without overlapping each other, actually presenting two different perspectives, which have bridges between them, but again, are not the same perspective. So I would invite now all of us actually to present our questions to the two speakers, and I would invite to do so by using the function raising hands in order that I know the order, the order of to give you the possibility to ask your question. So if there are any questions, now it's the moment. So perhaps waiting that for questions to arrive, I do have several questions, and I will try to ask a question for both of you. So basically, it seems to me that both of you have presented like the classical limit of artificial intelligence, current artificial intelligence, but in two different wordings. So for Sara, it is basically the metaphor of the parrot, right? So so basically, the artificial intelligence doesn't program itself on one hand, and I would even add, is not able to have to produce feedbacks on its own results. For instance, for me, who is currently working in symbolic artificial intelligence, this is particularly interesting because you mentioned like the theorem provers, right? Which basically just demonstrate if a theorem can be provable or not. That's an example of symbolic artificial intelligence. Maybe one possibility would be to go to a stronger artificial intelligence. One possibility would be to perhaps build symbolic artificial intelligence who can ask the question and then what I do with this result. I mean, if I detect, if me, artificial intelligence software, detect that some axioms in a specific mathematical theory are inconsistent, that what should I do with this? Just rather than just presenting the answer, okay, they are inconsistent. I don't know. So that's an open question that I ask you. And on the other hand, for you, Mark, you have mentioning this self-reckoning. And I wanted to ask you if for you, the possibility of perceiving one's own existence in the world, as you mentioned, has link with the self-reckoning. Sorry, yeah.
So linked with what?
Sorry?
You said whether perceiving, one's own existence in the world is linked to, and I missed that last word.
To the self-reckoning. It is, if it is a form of self-reckoning, yeah. Okay, this is my double question.
Maybe I go first. I think the question is super interesting and would need a lot of work. The only thing that I feel capable of answering right now is that there is actually very interesting work from other teams that have been trying to apply stuff very similar to theorem provers to the scope of moral decisions. So basically, they are training with natural language processing to be able to understand the questions, and then they infer the rules, they audit the rules, and that is where the morality is input by the human. And right now, what they have is models. There are two types of models that they have. I can give you the name of the team. It's actually from a Spanish team, and the model is Socrates, because they have two of them. One of them applies those rules that they have extracted to a new problem, and that is very useful because one can enter a moral question, and the artificial intelligence will reply with what is the most moral course of action and why, and what is the value that is involved. So should I give two equal pieces of cake to my daughter and my son, or should one piece be bigger than the other? And then so equal pieces, and why? Because of justice, I don't know. And this sort of reply. And they also have another one, because very interestingly, what these guys say is that human beings don't like to be taught about, or don't like to be told exactly what to do in moral terms. that we are comfortable, and actually my point is that we shouldn't be comfortable ever taking just the solution from an artificial intelligence model on important decisions, but they say that only in the moral ones, we are not comfortable just taking the output from a machine. So what they say is that the only possible answer to the machines being helping humans in the moral decisions is that of Socrates. So what the machine does is just to pose questions. So should the two pieces of cake be the same? And then Socrates AI would say, do you believe that people should be treated equally, regardless of their characteristics? And if you say yes, do you believe that both your daughter and your son are people? Do you believe that? And then by questioning, it leads you to the result. And yeah, what I find really interesting about that is this thing about the machine not giving you an answer, but just the questions to guide you, because the moral decision is only attainable by the moral subject, which is only the human. Although we can define many different, and I think Mark was very good when hinting that was one of the slides that I was taking a photo of when referring to the self. And there are many different ways in which we can understand the self. He was talking about having motivations and about having an autobiography. But others have given other definitions. For instance, Floridi has given us the definition of giving an ethical agent and an ethical patient. And the machine would be an ethical patient, but not an ethical agent, or maybe something in between. So we need to be very careful with that definition in order to select which kind of models can be more useful, the ones that tell you what to do, or the ones that just guide you with the questions, so to speak. But we could be like thinking about your question for so long. I'm sorry that is just like one tiny comment.
Oh yeah, I think I guess you're asking about the self-reckoning and about having keep the AI perceiving its own existence in the world being kind of key to that. And yes, I think it is. I think, and that's in a certain sense going from kind of what I talking about like the dimensions, including a dimension for the self. Part of the transition to why I bring in the levels is, when AI is trying to perceive its own existence in the world, like how does it perceive it? Is it just, oh, here's an AI, it's a black box? Is it, what can that AI do? And in terms of like just an AI system, you can look at it, well, it has some hardware, it has some software, which is important from like security perspective. If you're an AI security or monitoring security, it's got algorithms, different models. That's something we're actually documenting now with machine learning using model cards. Is it a social agent? Does it interact with people? Does it have language ability, even like, going to like the Star Wars, classic Star Wars, Star Wars, 3CPO and R2D2, they have different abilities. What's your model, of that? Does it have a particular value system? If so, what is its value? And you can imagine even in robots today, a caring robot that's in a home versus a military autonomous drone versus something that does rescue in high risk situations. And so right now they're constructed with a particular value systems. But you can imagine them being adaptive, like a generic robot, like what Elon Musk is trying to do, being adapted for different environments and actually having different explicit value systems built into its functionality. And so I think that is, when the AI goes to recognize itself, it's using those kind of frameworks to represent the external world and itself as AI as itself. And I think the pivot there is we tend to think of there's the individual set of self, and then we construct models for others. But I think psychologically, there's more evidence that, we exist, and then we build these models of others, developmentally, parents first, other caregivers, and then we construct our sense of self. And saying that we construct a sense of self as part of our perception of the world is something that comes kind of later in the process, and that's something we have to build, as opposed to starting with that and saying, hey, wow, we've got that in humans, how do we get it in AI? When the reality is, as humans, we've actually had to construct it to get to the point where we're at now anyway.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. And also Sara, of course, for your clear answers. Thank you. So please, Johan Casas Roma, did you have a question? I'm sorry, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, your...
Yeah, thank you. It was actually quite well pronounced. So thank you both, Sara and Mark, for the really interesting talks. I have sort of a question for Sara. It's more than a direct question, is that I would like to hear your opinion on something that somewhat troubles me, so to speak, or kind of preoccupies me in some way. So it is quite directly connected to this idea of the subjective experience of something, or the emotion related to doing something that, but instead of focusing on whether the machine can have like an emotional experience of doing something, or can enjoy doing something, like in the example of the dancer, whether it can feel the joy of dancing. So I'm thinking about all these, say, subjectively valuable skills from the point of view of the human in itself, like arts, like painting, or like dancing, or like something like that. And so I'm thinking those activities, so beyond the product that they create, say the painting, for instance, like those really awesome drawings that DALL-E can create, beyond the painting that comes out of it, all these artistic processes have a lot of value in themselves, in the process of actually creating that art, and in the joy that the artists kind of feel while doing it. And so what worries me in some way is there a risk of, say, displacement or devaluation of these experiences once that AI started becoming actually quite proficient in, I don't know if I want to say replacing, but at the very least, kind of providing the same results on this sort of creation process that were, say, more traditionally linked to creativity, or some skills that were traditionally associated to human beings. So what's the motivation behind this? Who do you think that would benefit from, say, having way quicker access to artifacts, say artistic artifacts, but without the chance of, say, enjoying the process of creating them, or by displacing the process of creating them to a machine that maybe do not or cannot feel the enjoyment of doing it, instead of a human who would actually enjoy it? I hope I made the question as clear as possible. I kind of ramble a little bit, but hopefully it's clear.
I think it was totally clear. I don't know if it was totally clear to me, because I share the same preoccupation with you. So having thought quite a lot about this, I'm going to try to condense what I have reached as my conclusion. But let me first say that I am concerned as well. And in some of the examples that we have seen, such as artificial intelligence and image generation. With image generation, there are still some people saying that the image generation by the artificial intelligence doesn't have any soul, and you can see that it is very predictable. So the critics say that it is very predictable. I cannot really agree with that, because I have been playing with it, and as I have shared with you, is a wonder the way that it works. So even if it is predictable now, at some point it is completely possible that it would be as proficient as a human artist, and we cannot negate that possibility. There is nothing magical in the human creation that is not going to be achieved by machine. And let me say more: most of the people who paint, I paint myself. I like painting, I like composing, I play piano, I sing, and I have to be aware that I am mediocre doing all those things. Being mediocre doing all those things means that there's going to be a computer who does them much better than I do. So the only element that makes me do it is not the outcome. It is the joy that I feel in the process. Is what I feel in the process, expressing myself, is all those elements that are currently being negated. Because right now we live in a paradigm where the only thing that is important is the product. And as you are saying, art is bigger than the product of the art. And I think that this was made very clear by Pollock, the painter. And you know the way that he used to paint, he would lay the canvas on the floor and just throw paint, and it would be like a cathartic experience for him. And that experience, he would always be clear that it was much bigger than the end result, which for him was rubbish, even though it was sold by millions. It was sold for millions of dollars. So there is a risk of the devaluation of the product, for sure. The devaluation of the product is already there. There is a lot of human beings that are working in the generation of images, a lot of photographers, a lot of graphic designers who would lose their jobs very quickly. That is for sure. A lot of animators who would lose their jobs, because on top of DALL-E being there, there's also artificial intelligence which create animations. All those are going to have a great trouble finding jobs, because in the job, when you perform a job, your employment is only valuing your production. So it's the product. So if now there is an artificial intelligence, your employer doesn't care what you feel when you are creating. So you are out of the market. That is going to happen. And that is very problematic in itself. However, do I think that people won't paint, or people won't sing, people won't? I don't think so. But I think that there has to be a change in the current mindset. That right now, we, and probably the group that are inside here discussing these issues is probably the least touched by this. But in society in general, we have this focus on productivity, on the end result. What is important? It's important the figures only, the commodity, how much money I make, how big my home is, how many papers I write. Everything is numbers. Everything is commodities. Everything is the same. And there is no concern for the experience. It's not the paper that I write. For me, it's not the paper that I write. It's how important I think the paper is. How much that paper aligns with what I think, what I believe, what I. And I think that sentiment might be shared more or less by some people, but that needs to grow. And DALL-E being able to paint and win awards is something that if we are intelligent, if we are smart as a society, it would lead us to value what is really important. Because what is important about art is not, as Pollock was saying, is not the canvas with the drops of color. That is nice, and you can put it on your home, that is nice. But what is important is what you are transmitting with your art. Is when Picasso painted the Guernica. It was a cry of help with about the civil war in Spain. Is what are you transmitting? It's not the lines, it's not the style. The style is amazing. You can be hours looking at that paint. Okay, it's amazing. But now I can ask DALL-E to paint my portrait in Picasso style, and it would do it. What is important is what you are transmitting, what you are feeling, what is your intention, is the meaning behind your actions. Is the emotion, and it is the meaning. And right now we live in a world where emotion is not important and meaning is not there even. So I have let's say that my hope is that all these advances would lead us to realize what is really important about the things that we do as human beings, which is how we breathe, how we communicate, how we spend our time. But it's going to be a difficult a difficult period. I think that it is very important that we are reflecting on these questions and to have seminars such as this one to be able to provide as much of a guide as we can on this.
Thank you. That's a super insightful answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. So next question from Ricardo.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Mark, for such a wonderful talks. I have a question that I would perhaps say it's a philosophical question. Probably you know about the debate that goes on in the philosophy of mind about the ontological status of mind, of consciousness. And right now, we know that many people are looking for alternatives to physicalism, and mainly because of those qualia arguments. Sara mentioned qualia, and people are talking about dualistic approaches, cosmopsychism. Many people are trying to find out whether cosmopsychism is an alternative to physicalism. So I'd like to hear from you about how AI stands on that debate, because I know that it seems to me that many people that work in machine consciousness or artificial consciousness, they seem to assume a physicalist framework. I think Igor Alexander had said something quite explicitly about that. But if it is assumed that physicalist is true within machine consciousness or even artificial intelligence, I wonder whether it can somehow contribute to the debate. So that's like an impression of an outsider. And I would like to hear from you.
Sure, yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, I mean, I think AI can contribute to the debate. I think that as we try and model these processes, we learn about them. And I think that AI has been informing cognitive psychology and other fields of psychology. And I think as we kind of also bring in kind of, findings from neuroscience that our models of human thought will, and mind cognitive processes will get better, and then that can inform AI. And so I think there is a synergy there that will be improved. I think for me, and part of this goes to kind of the theology and science, dialogue that I take part in, is that I think, I think it's fine to start with physicalism, but then it needs to be a non-reductive physicalism. That, I don't believe that you can completely reduce biology to physical. And I think that the conflation of that is actually part of what makes it challenging to think about, what's happening cognitive, kind of this mental or psychological, is because it's like, well, how do you reduce it to the physical? Well, I don't know how. Maybe it's something separate, Whereas I think there is a way in which we can look at that reduction, and it's what biologists have been studying and neuroscientists. And so when we kind of give biology kind of heavier weight in that kind of causal discourse, then we can talk about the physical and what's the transition from physical to the organic, biological, build it up, as has happened over evolution, and so we get these constructs that have evolved over time, and then we kind of look at it, from a at this point in time and say, well, how do we build that? Well, the point is, it has been a dynamic process, and so then we can look at it in terms of these mental constructs. And I think kind of from the other perspective, and this is where the system theory helped me organize my thoughts, that we looked at like a fully formed, well-educated adult and say, well, how do we construct this de novo on a computer? Well, it wasn't constructed de novo in a person. We went through an education process, and that's built upon at least a couple of millennia of very relevant thought processes and language. And we're immersed within that, and we're structured to learn it very well, but we could build AI systems that are structured to learn that very well. And that's part of why I focused on language, is because I think that that's really important for that communication, that yes, there is a kind of a cognitive architecture that we need to build that is about what you would get from like, a primate, that has some, extra language ability. And then once you build that, then it's a process of like, education and machine learning and building that up. And it has, in a sense, has to be socialized to our way of looking at things in order for it to actually have those results. And so I think it is possible to work within a physicalist framework, but it has to be non-reductive.
Can I add something very quickly? I really liked Mark's answer and how we need to reject the reductionist physicalist framework, but there can be like some sort of physical, let's say that the physical substrate of consciousness is something that we need to discuss, and that it can be the key to how consciousness emerges. But there is another element that is very important, and that I don't hear being discussed as often as it should, which is when we discuss consciousness, some theories such as the phi theory of consciousness. I don't know if you are acquainted with that. Andrea is doing like, yes, of course, Andrea, you are, but it's like how information is condensed. That is the main metric that is used, right? So that
is that Totoni's theory?
No, it's an Italian guy. Andrea, help me. What is the name of the guy?
Tononi? I don't remember the name now.
Yeah, let me.
Is it Giulio Tononi?
Tononi, yes. Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, I said that, but I misspelled. I said Totoni. Yeah, yes, Tononi. I'm sorry, my mistake.
I'm sorry, Ricardo. I'm sorry, I didn't understand. It's Tononi, actually. So according to this guy's theory, consciousness depends on how information is integrated, and we can apply that phi formula to anything. So this would imply panpsychism. However, like when we look at so if that theory is true, then we would have consciousness in everything. So we can have two main models. One of them where consciousness is in everything, or one of them where consciousness is not in everything, which is related to the physical substrate that I link is not exactly what Mark said, but it is implied by what he's saying, I understand. So it might be that actually not everything is conscious, but just the matter that has some properties, such as the properties that the brain complies with, which we don't know exactly what they are. They might be the ones that Hammer of Penrose are pointing to in the microtubules in the neurons, something in quantum mechanics. It can be many things, but there is a physical property of some systems where consciousness emerges. So there is a distinction in nature, and something is conscious, something is not, or there is panpsychism. And this is very, very important when we are talking about artificial consciousness. And this is the point that I say that not many people are talking about, and for me it's very important and very clear. If we say that what Tononi is saying is right, or is kind of right, maybe the phi function is not that function, but is another function that we can apply to any process that operates on information, then panpsychism is the way to go. And this means that when we build a computer, at some point, it will be conscious. At some point, that has to do with the complexity of the calculation or with the quality of the calculation, it will be conscious. However, if we, on the other hand, if we say that consciousness depends on some physical properties of matter, then we cannot make a computer as the ones that we have right now, these computers that we are working on, there is no guarantee that just by making them larger, consciousness will emerge. This does not make sense. Maybe the matter that we have in our brains has some properties, and if we want conscious machines, then we will need to make machines out of neurons, for instance, which is a possibility. We can do that. So to say that the physical properties of the brain are the ones that underlie consciousness is not the same as to say that we cannot build conscious machines. It would just be a different type of machines. And this is a very important aspect of the problem that I think that not many people are discussing, and is very important.
Thank you very much. Francisco.
Thank you, you two, for your wonderful presentation. So I would like to ask a philosophical question as well, sort of a philosophical question. So perhaps it's kind of a question to you, Mark, but Sara is also very welcome to jump in, especially because I'm also curious to see what she thinks about this. Mark, can you please go back to your slides in which you have like those, like, I don't know, 7 levels of like from transcendental to the transcendental level to the atomic level? Because my question is sort of related to that. Right before that. Oh yeah, so perhaps, yeah, exactly. So I was thinking, because right now I'm working on the metaphysics of free will. So my intuition, I mean, many people's intuition would be that if AI is programmed to do something, so they are supposed not to be free, but at the same time, if they have any level of, they have any abilities at all to be creative, so there seems to be some space for freedom, right? Now, one of the things that might have, I mean, that's one of the question. One of the question is to ask if you think that the AIs can also help us to resolve the free will problem. And one of the reasons why I asked this is because one of the arguments for free will, for example, is that we can have like we can divide beings in terms of their properties, in terms of lower level properties, like heat is basically molecular motion, but there's also these higher level properties that consciousness have, like they're supposed to have, that cannot be reduced to these more lower level properties. So would you say that this transcendental level of human systems, that if the robot or AI can have, is actually supervenes on the subatomic level, for example, so for AI to have. And the other question that I have is also if we can create an AI machine that is able to have like all of those levels, for example. I mean, is there any difference, any like meaningful difference between a human being? Because if they are able to like ask meaningful questions, like ascribe like aesthetic values, ask questions about God's existence, so it looks like we are facing a being which has all the properties that a person has, although it's not a biological being, right? It's an artificial being. So, so these are the kinds of questions that I have for you. Do you think that AI can help us to understand like those questions? I mean, from metaphysical questions to free will, also to those other metaphysical questions about if we can if the higher level properties supervene on lower level properties.
Yeah, that's a lot. I'll answer what I can.
So sorry. Yeah, lots of questions.
No. I mean, it's great. I mean, it opens up, a lot of space. I think, I mean, so I guess to answer one of the latter questions first. So I mean, I'm using this as a framework for human systems, and then by analogy, saying this is a good guide for building AI, in part because it has to interact with us. But at the same time, this is also like, particular to human. So for example, for us, we have psychological, traits, and then we form societies, whereas, social insects tend to actually form collectives, and then those are the ones that get the psychological traits. And so I think this is a useful framework, but it's not even, necessarily there descriptive of everything in the animal world. So it certainly might be different for AI. But it's just a kind of a place to start, and a place to actually model the communication, between us and AI. So I think in terms of the supervening, I think for me, and this is part of like, working within kind of an emergent framework, is that there are causal properties that occur at the different levels with the strong emergence. And it's what built on Terry Deacon's work, who talks about absenteals, these places where you just can't reduce. An example being like, with the nucleotides of DNA, it's, if you're just looking at it physically, it's just a molecule. But it's, when you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, it's the nucleotides that fit into that backbone over a long period of time that leads to this. And so you can't reduce evolutionary history down just to the molecule, because when you're looking at just an empty space, it's just a space in the backbone there. And so, and similarly, like with synapses, in the brain, it's just empty space, and that's places where you can't do the reduction. And so with that, like bringing in the free will, I think it occurs in kind of two different ways. So one is kind of this bottom up, I think, I think there is that kind of, maybe an ontological indeterminism that's available in quantum theory. And so when you move into a physical system, I mean, if you take kind of a Newtonian perspective, it's very deterministic, but there's going to be these fluctuations, whether they're chaotic determinations in a Newtonian system, or whether it's, structures that build up, kind of, with quantum, that actually gives these kind of, epistemological indeterminacies that open up the space for free will. And I think part of what happens biologically is there are, in a sense, these tunnels, where, for example, when we see something, our perception depends upon these very slight quantum effects that photons hit, protein structures, in the retina, that then trigger signals in the brain. And so it's a quantum effect, but unlike some theories that say they get dampened out, I think biologically there are structures that actually protect that. And so that actually leads to, to have those abilities. And then I think there is some theory, it's Walter Freeman's theory within neuroscience, where the theories that he used for what he calls kind of mesodynamic, these intermediate structures in the brain, are actually, the mathematics is very similar to what's used to study quantum mechanics. And so even if it's kind of built, even if it's just an analogy, I think there are these systems that do have kind of this indeterminacy. And so as you move up, I think that there are like, kind of, transcendent level or social level, that where we create the space for, God, where, and not, God externally, but when we have a conversation about God, what meaning do we, how do we bring our interpretations? Within the community, is it a place where we can have kind of creative discussion and, look at it from diverse perspectives and come up with something that really wouldn't have been feasible to imagine, a century ago? Are we creating that, that space? And then I think there, the free will. So I know I'm tossing a lot of people, but like I worked with Warren Brown at Fuller, and he and Nancy Murphy wrote this book where they talk about kind of the neuroscience of free will, and for them it was about free want. And so what's happening in the brain is we've got these different possibilities, and it's not, there's the kind of, the brain itself is generating the possibilities. And then the decision is we select one of those. And so it's the selection process that's key to the free will. And so when we generate these ideas, even in community, and then we listen and we hold on to one, there's that selection process. And so the free will doesn't have to be generated. It doesn't have to explain everything. We're generating these possibilities, and then it's the selection process. And kind of fundamental to what I think happens as these systems emerge is actually a selection process. We build these, like, biologically, these molecules, some of those get selected evolutionary. We talk about things, some ideas get selected culturally to progress, and become more informative. And so I think that's kind of where it fits in more from a systemic perspective. It's both creating the space from this kind of ontological indeterminism, but then also within each level, we build these systems that in a sense protect that ability to make the selection that we can think of both of those as, at least components of free will.
Thank you very much. You ended up like answering all the 3 questions that I asked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add, I think, Francisco, maybe you are aware of the work in computational metaphysics by Zalta, right?
No, I'm not. I'd like to know more about it. If you can send.
I will write you an email. Yes.
Oh, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So if there aren't other questions, I think that we can thank our speakers for their very interesting and engaging thoughts, papers, sorry. So you certainly gave us food for thought. This is what I wanted to say. And thank you for all the questions too and answers. And so we will see in 2 weeks, right, Ricardo? No, in 1 month, right?
Yeah, there won't be a November webinar because of the Varanasi conference.
Exactly.
Yeah, so in December we'll be back with Eleanor Stamp. She's going to speak about. Yeah,
Perfect.
She's a very, very known philosopher. She's going to speak something about Christian philosophy. Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much again, and see you here on the next webinar of Theology and Religion group, and have a nice evening or day, or depending on your time frame. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.